From the Great Basin to the Rockies to the four corners of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Dwayne Benson here for KMMU Main Street Media Utah, coming to you live. We are streaming on YouTube, Rumble, X, and our website, kmmu.org. Please join our host, John Twitchell, for Let's Talk Utah's Talk with John.
Good afternoon, my friends. This is Talk with John here on Main Street Media Utah, KMMU.org. Looking forward to being with you for the next 2 hours. I'll be introducing my guest momentarily. But first, let's start off with the normal top of the hour show intro. First, I'm going to give my show prayer, and then I'm going to give my show mantra. And as you've heard many times before, folks, this is the prayer of my heart. This is when it comes to doing my show. It's the prayer of my heart. It's not exactly what I live up to all the time, and as well as with my mantra. But, one day trying to do better than the next. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra. Where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. All right, folks. Now, I'll be introducing my guest here, and we'll bring him up in just a moment. But first, what I want to do is give out a little bit of his background. My guest today is Michael Letts, founder, president, and CEO of Invest USA. It's a national grassroots nonprofit organization that is helping hundreds of communities provide thousands of bulletproof vests for their police forces through educational, public relations, sponsorships, and fundraising programs. And he happens to be, as I said, the founder, president, and CEO. So, folks, I want to introduce my good friend, Michael Letts. Michael, thank you for joining me so much today. Look forward to being with you for the next roughly 2 hours.
Well, it's always a privilege to be with you, John. We really appreciate what you're doing to try to keep this country informed. We are in perilous times. We've always said we're in the epic battle, epic struggle between good and evil for the very soul of America. Quite frankly, over the past 30, 60 days, things are progressing well with the administration. I'm not giving any doomsday speech, but I can tell you what, the other side is fully engaged now, and roadblock after roadblock, landmine after landmine are being detonated, and we're in for a rocky road ahead.
We are, and we've got a lot of things to talk about. A number of things to talk about. You and I probably have a combined, close to 10 topics, but I wanted to pull up the Gateway Pundit and see what the breaking news was, because I went from being businessman talk with John now to sales guy, or excuse me, I do sales, and I'm a sales guy. That is what I do, and then now I'm doing talk with John guy, right, on my show.
Different
So let's
caps.
bring up a couple. Pardon me.
Different hats. You do them well.
Different hats. So something that I thought I'd throw out there, that, as most of you know, but many of you may not know this, that the Catholic Pope passed away. Pope Francis passed away early yesterday morning. And there will be a new election that will start sometime between May 6th and May 12th. And there are 252 cardinals, but 135 of them are eligible to vote in the next papal conclave, those under the age of 80. Now, of 135 of those electors that are eligible to vote, 109 of them were appointed by Francis himself, comprising almost 80% of the electorate that could possibly vote for Pope. So, what's the concern there? Well, he happens to be one of the most uh, what's the proper term? He happens to
Mm.
be the most progressive pope in probably the history of the papal I almost said papal presidency. Probably not a papal presidency, but of the Pope. And forgive me, folks, no, I am not Catholic, so I don't have 100% understanding of it. But I'll tell you this: it's something that matters because to the rest of the world, and it should. So, unfortunately, if he elected 80% of them, we may have, there seems to be a very big push from the actually from the Catholic membership of their church. Seems to be a pretty big move to being more conservative. Yet he wasn't necessarily the most conservative pope there's been. Your thoughts, Michael Letts?
Well, you've been very gracious, John. I mean, I'll be a little bit more blunt. Pope Francis is probably what I would call one of the most progressive, or I'm going to interchange another word. I'm going to get everybody mad at you, but most corrupt papals that I've ever seen in modern history. Why would I say that? His biggest concern is, while stating that he has compassion for the populace of the world, his political agenda was horrendous. He doesn't believe in sovereign borders. He believes that every country should just bring in as many immigrants and keep them as possible. Well, that's very difficult to do, to maintain sovereignty in a country when you're bringing it full of people who don't support your constitution or your ideology, your philosophy. Makes absolutely no sense to do that. The other thing that's, of course, very frightening is he oversaw one of the biggest child sex trafficking operations in the world. We know that for a fact, and nobody wants to talk about it. But we know that that's factual. We have the information. I never once saw them take the bull by the horns and address the issue. And so, quite frankly, it's been disappointing because, and I'm not just going to pick on the Pope. I have made it very clear in my book, Truth, Lies, and Control, that churches itself all across the world have abandoned their leadership role and have turned to becoming country clubs and just stations for socialization instead of providing values and principles and truth. Of course, it's kind of hard to do that sometimes when your leadership is practicing the opposite. We know the corruption that we've seen in the leadership from the Catholic Church all across the world. We also know, this is a known fact, everybody knows that nothing gets done about it. It continues to go on. What happens is you transfer a priest who's been molesting and abusing altar boys. You move him from one parish, you throw him across the country to another. That doesn't solve anything, John. That just moves the problem all around. That's been going on for quite some time. So, what I would like to see is, I would like to see them take their roles seriously and put somebody in who actually believes in the scripture, believes in the values and principles that it espouses, and they enforce it. But unfortunately, I think you hit the nail on the head, John, with him having appointed 80% of his successors. He's probably well thought it out, because this was not a sudden death. He'd been ill for some time, as to who he thought would make a great successor to uh, his position, to the Pope. So that's what I expect. But hey, maybe I got my fingers crossed. Maybe we'll be wrong, and maybe we'll all be greatly surprised.
Well, let's hope we are. Let's hope we are. Um, well, let's get to a couple other topics that we had not discussed topping, because I pulled up the Gateway Pundit to see what we had for breaking news. I do think this is worth mentioning, and I think we're going to cover this a little bit. So maybe we hit one of the topics. El Salvador President Bukele trolled far left rep Maxwell Frost on Tuesday. Congressman Maxwell Frost was one of the Democrat lawmakers who traveled to El Salvador this week to meet with the wife beater and MS-13 gang member Kilmar Garcia. Inspired by Dems Senator Van Hollen,
From Maryland.
a bunch of others went. Kilmar is an El Salvadorian national who is illegally residing in Maryland in 2019, and an immigrant judge ordered Garcia, an alleged member of the dangerous MS-13 gang, removed from the U.S. Additionally, an immigration appellate court also upheld the immigration judge decision, was given due process. On Monday, 4 Dems were denied a visit to Garcia because their trip was not an official capacity. Comer's decision to deny Democrat Rep. Frost request for Codell threw their political stunt into chaos. Rep. Frost whined about being denied access to Garcia on Monday. We got word at the embassy that our request has been denied by the government here locally because they say we are not here on official capacity. There's a few words in here that I can't use from tweets. So I'm going to say this. Good. I love the El Salvadoran president say, and there's a part of me, so also the senator went down and met with him. I love how the El Salvadoran president had some pictures taken and said, this is how the rapist gang member is treated by a senator. I also love some of the other statements that have been made throughout the United States. It's nice to know that this senator is more interested in talking to this gang member who's was a wife, beat his wife. When she went on with Michael Strahan, the former NFL football player, I think on Today, he said, so tell me about your husband. She didn't want to talk about him.
She's smart because MS-13 still has its prongs all across this country.
And so and she didn't talk about him in a positive way in any way, shape, or form. So, I mean, the bottom line is what that said to me is a woman saying, I don't care that he's there. In fact, I'm kind of glad. That's what I was reading in between the lines. And then that senator from Maryland has the gall to say, well, I came here and met with him, and now I can go back and report to his wife and family that he is healthy and well. Mr. Senator, it's nice to know that you're spending much more time with this gang member who's a wife beater than you are spending with a mother or the children of a woman that was raped and killed by illegal aliens.
Correct.
So it's nice to know where your heart is. Please, Democrat Party, keep on doing this because it is a battle you're going to lose.
Well, you're exactly right, John. Of course, they don't feel that way. You got to go back to the basis, the origin of what's going on. As we said when we first started the show, the Democrats are in such disarray that they are determined that if they're going to survive, they've got to pull out every measure to stop this administration's agenda. And so they haven't been able to do it by saying, well, we're going to keep gang members here, have the judges keep any planes from leaving, keep them all here. That didn't work out too well. So they're trying to find something they can pull on the heartstrings of the American people. Well, they think they found one. We'll have the media characterize this as an innocent Maryland dad. We're not going to say that he's not an American citizen. We're just going to say he's a Maryland dad with little children who love and adore him, a darling wife, and he was just snatched off the street by this tyrannical police nation that the president has created. And if we don't do something and stand up to him now, we're all going to be ended up in the same boat. They thought that was the rallying cry. Now, they're willing to die on this. They're willing to fall on the sword for this. Quite frankly, it's a pretty stupid sword to follow on because of the following. When you look at the facts, as you've already pointed out, he's been arrested twice in this country before on other various charges and on his deportation. He's had his deportation hearings. So they can't say he doesn't have habeas corpus. He already did. Twice, the courts found him, and in their notes, the judge, this is not my saying or your saying, John, the judge wrote down, member of MS-13 gang. 2 different judges saw the evidence and said he was a member of the MS-13 gang. You look at his knuckles. He's got MS-13 tattooed on him. Why did we pick him up to begin with? He was with a coalition of MS-13 gang members. You know, I've been around the gangs before. Remember I told you I grew up in Mexico. I will tell you this, John. If you're not one of them, you better be careful hanging around them because you're going to end up in a body bag. And the fact that he was with them, they recognized him, they were high-fiving him, they were having him participate in the group. All anybody with any common sense needs to know. And the final thing is he is a citizen of El Salvador, not an American citizen, never has been, never be considered to be a citizen of this country. Yet these far leftists somehow feel like they're going to use our tax dollars. You remember, the leftists never move anything if it comes out of their own pocket. They always make you and I pay for it. And they're going to, first of all, they sent a senator down there. I'm not leaving without him returning. Well, you quickly eat those words. You figured he's going to be there a long time. Of course, we were encouraging him. Great, I agree. Stay there as long as it takes.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
But that didn't work out too well. So he made his plea.
Sorry. You know what? I owe you an apology. I owe the rest of America an apology. I didn't do a good enough job of a Twitter campaign and else to say, you go, Senator. You tell him, do not leave until you leave without him. Just stay there until you. Yeah, that's what we should say to all these Congress people.
Exactly. As many Democrats as want to go and stay, in fact, we'll help raise the money to send them over there because we're tired of using tax dollars to get over there. So he went over there. He decided he made his pitch. The president of El Salvador not only told him no, but came back and met with the president Trump. And then they had a press conference. He says he's our citizen. We've already tried him. We know his background. He's been convicted. He will serve his sentence in the country in which he is a national and he committed the crimes. End of discussion. Butt out. He's our guy. But you know, the Democrats never can understand English and what it means. So now they've sent down a second delegation of congressmen, not senators this time, congressmen, to demand if they get to meet him because they're not so sure that he is safe and secure. I thought it was ironic how the president said, "Who are you to demand anything? You're not El Salvadorian legislators or congressmen. You're an American. You're on our soil now. You're in our territory. He's our citizen. We will do what we want to with him." No, you don't get to see him. It's not an official visit anyway. The Speaker of the House never did authorize this trip. Y'all came on your own. So they have hit a roadblock. There's no way they can get around. But they're hoping to use the mainstream media to fan the emotional flames of your heart. This poor little American Maryland dad is being abused and tortured and everything else they want to do. And it will be you next if we don't stand up to these tyrannical people. Forget the facts. They don't care about the facts. Well, quite frankly, this was getting shot down pretty quick. They're going to see that they are going to die on this sword. Because of just what you said, John, it's a great thing for us to know that they care more about bringing an illegal immigrant who's had convictions and who is known to be a member of a terrorist organizational group that tortures people, okay? They want to bring them back on American dime and keep them here, but they don't care about visiting the Americans who so desperately need help, who are homeless on the street, our veterans and all who need better insurance, and the list can go on and on.
We will come back to more to do with this illegal alien issue. We'll come back to that. The next thing that is, I want to read this, and yet another one from the Gateway Pundit. Breaking news. This happened just a couple hours ago, and yet another blow to the immigration law enforcement. The Supreme Court today ruled 5-4 in Valquez versus Bondi that illegal aliens granted voluntary departure under federal immigration law can remain in the United States past their court-ordered departure deadline if that deadline happens to fall on a weekend or legal holiday. Justice Neil Gorsuch authored the majority opinion, joined by Justice Roberts, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, effectively rewriting the meaning of a 60-day voluntary departure period, to accommodate the convenience of the deportable individuals, not the rule of law. At the center of the case was Hugo Valquez, a Mexican national who entered in the U.S. illegally nearly 2 decades ago and was ordered to leave within 60 days. His departure deadline fell on a Saturday, but instead of leaving, he filed for a motion to reopen his case on the following Monday. All right. What are your thoughts with this?
Well, let's talk about why I chose board, because I have a lot of people who have asked me today on all the shows we've been on. Who cares? Well, here's why we care. Because not that this has a huge consequential aspect on our deportation, but it does give you an insight as to where our U.S. Supreme Court leaders are headed. And quite frankly, they are now more concerned that it's, remember, it's a very simple process, John. The commander in chief, the president, is in control of deportation and who comes and who goes. That's just the way the Constitution reads, okay? That's the way it is. And remember, the Supreme Court initially upheld that. Oh, yeah, the Supreme Court, the commander in chief has sole authority over deportation, especially when he invokes the Aliens Enemies Act. That now they're starting to reverse themselves. Now they've come back and said, well, yeah, he still has sole control, but we have to make sure that every deportee has habeas corpus and gets a hearing. Well, here's the problem with that. You know, we're talking about millions and millions. Do you think our courts have the capacity to do that? How long do you think it'll take us to deport 10 million people if they all get a hearing? About 100 years, 150 years. And they know that. That's why they're doing it. They're trying to be obstructionists. On this particular ruling, you're going to tell me that the law gives them 60 days. But because they whine that it falls, their departure day falls on a Saturday or Sunday. I've traveled on a Saturday or Sunday. I don't know if you have or not, John, but I certainly have.
Well, I'm sure they've traveled on a Saturday.
Yeah, no question. But now suddenly the judges want to say, oh, we have to protect their rights. We have to be very concerned about how it affects them. So we're going to grant them a stay until the following business day, which, why is that important? Because they know good and well they hold their 60-day order for for deportation. They wait till the 59th day, then they run down and they put in an appeal. They want to appeal the process. They're doing everything they can to tell the president, you don't run this country. Illegal immigrants do. And we've got a Supreme Court and a court system that backs us. Here's what this boils down to, John. This is what I know it's on our list to talk about today, but this is what makes it such a huge issue. Who runs the country, John? According to the Constitution, the commander in chief, the president of the United States, who is elected by citizens. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm reading the Constitution. Who have registered and have the right to vote in this country. They elect who their leader will be. What does the court say? No, not quite. He gets to be the leader, but we get to check off everything he does. He has to get our approval first. That's nowhere in the Constitution. You don't have a leader if that's the case. You don't have a CEO of a company if he has to run everything by his vice president, by his accountant, et cetera, before he can make a decision. What happens when you have more than one person as the head of an organization, the head of a nation? You have a monster. When you have two heads on an animal, two-headed snake, two-headed gorilla.
How did that work out?
Yeah.
How did that work out?
It doesn't. It doesn't work at all. It creates nothing but a scenario of a monster. But it's where we are at, John. And here's what I want to make sure our listeners understand. This is becoming a very concerning matter for this country. Because right now, as we begin to look, and we begin to see what has transpired in the corruption and who it has affected, are we going to allow those who are involved in the corruption to continue to dictate what this country does? Are we going to have what the Constitution requires, and that's the leader that we elected, and we elected him, he was duly elected, and allow him to set the tone to be able to fulfill the promises that the people voted for? That's why they voted for him, to be able to make this country great once again. That's a very critical question, and until we get it resolved, we're in for a hurting in the days ahead.
Well, let's talk about a little bit. Let's kind of focus on the border and the border with the military installations and how Trump designated that area as a military zone, I believe, or what. I'll let you tell me what the technical definition is, but basically, My understanding is from California to Texas, he made that a military zone that the military had jurisdiction over. Frankly, I think that to me, it makes total sense. At least, except for like where the actual official entry points are, right?
Correct.
And I would also say maybe we ought to look at doing the same thing up in Canada as well, along the Canadian border. Now that's a lot bigger border to cover. But your thoughts?
Well,
Mike?
let's give our listeners so that they can make their own opinions. Let's give them the facts and tell them what happened and the history behind it. You know, when Teddy Roosevelt was president, and when the expansion from the east to the west, all the way out to California, Teddy recognized that one of the things that we needed to do was we need to have an easement that the government controlled, not the states, the U.S. government. Because you remember, you said, well, did he do something wrong? No, it has always been in our Constitution that the commander in chief, the federal government, sets the policy and the tone for immigration. So what he said is, okay, if that is our responsibility as a federal government, then we need a buffer zone in between our borders, say 100 feet, 150 feet, all the way across, that we can make sure we ensure the security and safety of our borders. Now, he did that not knowing what the implications would be over 100 and some odd years after that. But here's what the president did. He invoked what Teddy Roosevelt had already put into place and said, okay, that's our property. But here's what we're going to do about it. Here's why you need to understand what he did, why he did what he did. You know, unless you enact the Insurgency Act, technically, by law, you're not supposed to have military operations on American soil. In other words, you don't have military guards going back and forth, etc. So, except for now, there's an exception in there. You can do anything you want to on a military base. You're the military, that's your base. You're allowed to operate into it, train, firing range, whatever you need to do on your base. So the president was smart. He says, you know what? I'm going to make the whole southern border a military base. Now things have a different implication. If you decide to cross the river and come into the United States, you're not coming into the state of Texas, the state of Arizona. You are coming on, you are setting foot on a military installation. That now comes under the U.S. Military Council, Military Tribunal jurisdiction. So that's a whole different set of rules. You try to sneak on a military installation anywhere in the country if you'd like, feel free to try to do so. See how far they get you. That will get you swift capture and swift punishment. So the president has now made another great attempt and great move to protect our borders. This is now a military installation from Texas to California. Anyone crossing that border has now set foot on a military installation, even if it's only 150 feet wide. But it's maybe 150 feet wide, but it's what, 3,000 miles long? So you're now setting foot on military property. The other thing it does is it allows the president to set up temporary encampments anywhere he wants to in that area. He can have a temporary encampment in 3 or 4 different states. He can have one every 50 feet if he wants to. Plus, it allows him to move tens of thousands of soldiers for training maneuvers and exercises, which is what we should be doing. Quite frankly, if you will remember under the previous administration, we got soft bellies. We didn't do a whole lot. Now, this president now wants to make sure we have a very strategic and effective and strong striking force. And they need constant military maneuvers to be able to perfect their skills. Now, he can continually have they're rotating in and out all up and down the border, performing military exercises 24/7. So you know what that means? If you understand how this scenario got set up, you remember I told you the cartels have set up base across the river. Remember I told you they have ordinances that they purchase on the black market, either from the armament shipments that were going to Ukraine or from what we left behind in Afghanistan. We're not going to leave those kind of ordinances pointed across a 100-foot river, pointed at America and its security. So we have set the first message. Our military is now here. Don't worry about me trying to round them up, boys. They're all within 100 feet of you. We can move them across in a moment's notice. So now that we have set the stage, we're going to move. We've already done covert operations. I told you, I know the media has not picked up on it. We've already done covert operations on the other side of the river to eliminate. We've made it very clear to the cartels, you harm an American citizen, you have just stepped across the line. I told you this is what 2 months ago that they butchered 9 U.S. Citizen college students. No, I've said butchered. I'm using that word correctly. They cut them up into pieces, and they killed a couple other senior tourists with IEDs. And so we took quick action. Didn't ask for an audience. We did it. You never heard a word from the cartel for about 2 months after that. Now they're beginning to resurface because, as I predicted, their what we call their second tier is now forming or coming to the top to try to take control over what's left, what was not decimated. And now, because we recognize that, and of course now they have motive of, well, you walked out the first wave, we're going to have vengeance, we're going to pay you back. We're just making sure we're well positioned. Okay, if that's what you think you want to do, we have military units all up and down the border. And we're prepared to move them at any point in time. So I'd be very careful what my next move would be.
Well, the other thing is we just can protect the American public for those that are trying to sneak across that border.
Correct.
That's a pretty big border, but you try coming across, now you got to deal with the military.
Well, and here's the funny thing. Let me just cap out what you just said, John. Before this occurred, you got popped. You went through the system, especially during the Biden administration. You got here's a telephone number. Go anywhere you want to go and call in and schedule a date to have a judge determine whether you meet qualification for asylum or not. Now you're in a different jurisdiction. You're in a military jurisdiction. You set foot on a military installation. It's a whole different set of rules. Whole different set of it's a whole different game. So no, you're not just going to walk. Oop, made a mistake. I'll walk back across the river. Now you're going to be ours. In fact, for that matter, we will detain you for as long as necessary. You may be a prisoner of war before we know it. So quite frankly, this puts it in a whole different category. They better give that a lot of serious thought. Don't go out for a leisurely stroll and set foot on a military installation without authorization. Or even as an American citizen, I'm warning our citizens down there. Don't walk onto this military installation. This is kind of like you're entitled to be there. These are now military installations. You have to have authorization to be there. If you don't, you will be dealt with accordingly.
Well, I want to say that did the Supreme Court find that the responsibility for securing our borders was the federal government?
That is correct.
Not the state.
That is
right?
correct.
So, in my opinion, Donald Trump is just doing in accordance what the federal government wanted, what Joe Biden said, hey, that's our job, not Texas's
Correct.
job. So the bottom line is I'm all for the United States protecting itself. In the Constitution, it's the responsibility of the president and of Congress to make sure that the American public is protected. That's the number one job, is to protect our rights and to protect our property.
You would think, John, that we would all be on board talking about even the leftist liberals to want to protect the safety of our children, of our women. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So you have to you may not like the president at all. That's fine. But you have to at least give credit where credit's due. That's pretty ingenious to say, okay, well, I'll just work around your objections. We're just making a military installation. I can put as many military personnel now as I want to in an installation that happens to go the whole length of the border. And that sends a clear message that we're determined to defend our borders. We'll find a way to get it done, even if the Supreme Court and the rest of the judicial system are trying to be activists instead of constitutionalists and are trying to shut the system down that the American people voted for.
So what have you been hearing from your sources, how this process is going? How many people they're interacting with every day? So our numbers before he took this action, I want to say Tom Holman said that the incidents or the interactions at the border were down somewhere in the neighborhood of over 90%. I want to say it was right around 95.
Correct.
What's happening now? Who was coming across still, and what's happening?
Well, it was 93% is what we got it down to. But I can tell you now that we've got the military installations, it's almost at 100%. In fact, you could say it's 100%. There may be a few, because you remember this is a almost 3,000 mile border that, we don't have somebody posted every 30 feet, every 10 feet. So there may be a few still getting through. But if they are the gotaways and we're trying to track, we're now implementing using technology like drones, electronic surveillance, to make sure that we've got the whole landscape covered. Anybody that comes across, we don't have a unit there, we send one to them real quick to meet them and intercept them. So quite frankly, I would imagine by today, by the time that we're airing this evening, that we're probably at 100%. There is no activity on the borders now at this stage.
Okay. Do you think we should implement this on the northern border?
We're going to have to. You say, why would I make that statement? We've already seen the numbers, the statistics are showing. You can begin to get this. This is not available to the public yet, but it will be shortly. The shift is changing, and our cartelists now are all flying in to Canada. Yes, it's costing them an extra expense, but they're flying in their cargo, and you know what I mean by cargo, human beings. They're flying their cargo in to Canada and coming in through the northern borders now. So we're going to have no choice but to have to implement the same thing and probably do it very quickly. But understand, we're still playing, we're still fine tuning the model. We only have so many resources right now in this country, and we've only got so many assets. You say, why do we only have so many assets? Because you have the liberal left, and we'll go over this sometime, maybe not this one, and the next time I meet with you. All the corruption, the fraud, the money laundering that has been occurring on a daily basis out of the U.S. Treasury. That's why we're $36 trillion in debt. So that's why we have limited resources. Not because this country can't afford to do what needs to be done, because we've allowed people to keep stealing from you and I for generations, and that's coming to an end.
Well, we just might get back to that because I think that's well worth mentioning. And in fact, I think to some level it fits in with what the next subject I'd like to talk to. It does have a little bit to do with the border. Um, so there was a judge in New Mexico, a Democrat judge in New Mexico, who had a gang member working on his property, and then there was video, and from what I understand, law enforcement was following him around and saying, what's going on with this guy? And they found him doing basically military type training of going out and firing firearms with this gang member and other associates of the gang member.
Oh, you are correct. I mean, here's what we found. This particular judge, who, by the way, has had many cases dealing with illegal immigrants. So all those cases need to be reviewed now to determine the ethical and the legal implications of what this case means. But he brought in a member. I'm not talking about a conspiracy or somebody he thought. This is a member of Tren de Argueta. That's one of the new gangs that have been out trying to use long range rifles to take over apartment complexes, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on what they've been doing, trying to terrorize American citizens. And so basically, he's got a ranch. So this young gentleman invited all of his Tierra de Aguera gang members to come over and to go out and in the back property, take AK-47s, MP3s, et cetera, MP5s, excuse me, and decided to have a little fun, shooting practice, conduct military style operations, training operations. Can you imagine a judge helping terrorists? Because you remember, we have declared Tierra de Aguera as a domestic terrorist organization, helping terrorists in our own country to train, to be able to do, and we already know what their intent is. Their intent is to rule by fear. Now, if you want to call that an overthrow of the government, if you want to call, I don't care what the government does, as long as we control this particular town, this particular state, however you want to categorize it. But their intent is not good. Their intent is, very, very nefarious at best. And here he is helping them along the way. This is about our treason, folks. We've been talking about in the earlier part of this show
And I
the
want to say
real.
he's a George Soros funded
Yes,
judge.
he is. No question. No question. He's part of that list. And here's the other thing. Let me quickly expand because I want our listeners to have the most current information. We've always, and you've heard it coming from me, John, we've always in the past, George Soros funded. Yes, George and Alex Soros, his son, are especially pouring in their billions to try to bring about insurrection in this country. But it's not just them now. We have now discovered in the last couple of weeks major funding is coming from the Communist Chinese Party and being infiltrated as well. And they have, of course, they have a vested interest in doing that. I'll give a quick rabbit trail. I won't be long. But, China was very smart. We delivered them in World War II. They were overrun. They were crushed by the Japanese. They would have never existed had it not been for the blood and sacrifice of American soldiers. We freed China from imperialism from Japan. And this is the return of the thanks that we get. They decided that, you know what? I don't think we can militarily take on the United States of America. Smart move on their part. So how can we accomplish getting rid of this thorn in the side that believes in freedom when they believe in empirical rule and communism? Well, they were smart. They said, you know what we'll do? We'll help take over their educational system. We'll educate generations of people over time to hate America and to hate the values and principles, and we'll even force them to be removed, which they were successful in doing. We will spend our money instead of spending all our money buying more tanks and soldiers, et cetera, to put boots on the ground over there. We'll spend our money wisely. We'll buy politicians. We'll spend money influencing policy. And that is what you have seen them doing. That is what we've discovered. And here is the issue, and it will be coming out shortly. We're not talking about they spending $100. We're talking about hundreds of billions, perhaps even trillions of dollars that have been spent. And, unfortunately, when you take our society, which for generations I told you we have, thrown values and principles of our educational system, what takes the place of that is a void. And what takes the place of it? Well, greed. And people do anything for money now. And so it's not been hard for them to find recruits that if they pay them a little bit of cash, they'll do whatever they ask them to do. And that's what we are at today in this country. And that's what you see in our judicial system as well. This is just one judge of many. Quite frankly, it scares me for what I've seen. There's a lot of corruption within the judicial system as well that we're going to have to fix, John. I keep telling people this. I know nobody wants to hear it. When we initially began this, in the first administration, we didn't know any better. I'm talking about the first administration for Trump. In the second administration, we knew that corruption had some depth to it because they had the ability to appoint their cabinet members, their key personnel at the top to hire some of the people underneath them. Never did we realize how deep the corruption is. It's all the way down to the agents on the street. And quite frankly, because of that, if we don't get a handle on this, we can't survive. It's kind of like cancer. You cut half of your cancer out, guess what happens eventually, John? The other half goes back.
Why do you say it's all the way down to the individual? What evidence do you have that it's all the way down to the?
Your show's not long enough for me to give all the evidence, but I'll give a couple quick things. We've been talking about why is one of the reasons that we have not been able to get the Epstein files list released. Even though, and I do believe in my heart that Pam wants to do it, the Cash wants to do it, but why hasn't it been done? Well, first of all, you had agents, middle management in New York that hid the list. Okay, they didn't. They denied it existed. Once we had whistleblowers said it did exist, then we decided, okay, well, what's the next thing you want to do? Now, this is doing the right thing. I'm not saying we should have done the right thing, but this is doing the right thing. Go through all that information to make sure there's no identifying markers for victims. You don't want some little girl that's been traumatized to have a reporter stick a microphone in their face unawares and, hey, I want your comment. That's just not acceptable. So we put together thousands, yes, not hundreds, thousands of agents to come in and assist to scrub through that. Do you realize what we discovered they're doing? Here's what they're doing, John. They're saying, okay, we're going to take Amy's name totally off of here now so that there's no way to trace that she was a victim. Oh, well, I had John as the assailant. Well, guess what? John doesn't have a victim anymore that he assailed. So I might as well take John's name off the list too. Here's what they're doing. They're scrubbing the list. They're scrubbing it for people that they don't want to be exposed. And here's where the fear is. Why would the FBI give a horse's ass about whether somebody's on that list or not? Now you see what's going on. It has gone all the way down to the boots on the ground to help cover up nefarious activities that have been occurring for generations. And it's going to take a lot more than what the American people realize if we're going to turn this ship around.
Okay, so another thing that I heard is that multiple multiple locations of FBI agents are also have, it's basically open to all FBI agents that they can look at this information and start going through that. Is that part of what's happening too?
That is
And
correct.
is that why it's taking so long? Okay, so according to people you're speaking to, though, they're saying, Amy or Jimmy was molested or raped by one
Or
of Epstein's
worse,
people, or
the
worse.
Epstein Islands. Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah,
So
killed.
scrub that list. Detract. Detract that to make sure that it's not there. Which I support that. Okay, I get that. But if you're going to take, I mean, you're a law enforcement officer. You got to know better. Just because I don't tell you who you beat up, John, doesn't mean you didn't beat somebody up and shouldn't be held accountable for doing so. But you see how they're grasping at any straws they can get to help push. What's the other thing that's keeping the list hid?
So
Well, there's a lot of people on there that are not under our jurisdiction, that are other members of other foreign governments, and they don't want to create international crisis with other foreign governments. Well, you know what? I gave them a great solution on that one. Tell you what, we're going to make the list available to everybody we have jurisdiction over. The rest of you countries out there, the rest of the world, you can have your own people do whatever you want to with them. It's up to you, but we're going to deal with the people that we have jurisdiction over.
well, I would say uh, I, it from things that I've heard, there are what's the proper term? Like if you're an ambassador or something along those lines, you have
Diplomatic community.
diplomatic immunity. There are many people that have
That is
diplomatic
correct.
immunity. And
That
it
is
kind of
correct.
makes me wonder, like, so is Prince Andrew one of those people that have diplomatic immunity?
Let's
But
just say that Prince Andrew is one of many, 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 many on the list.
so you may have diplomatic immunity, but my opinion is we still put your name on the list. We fuzz out the some of the really bad behavior, but we show your keister on that information. That's my opinion. We put that
Now,
out
I
and
like
we put
yours
your
more
name on
than I like mine, John, but I mean, in a matter of diplomacy, let me just use that word loosely. Okay, here's what I suggested. We'll find all the British subjects. We won't expose them. Britain, here's your list. You do what you want to with them. Here's a list. Here's their crimes. They're under your citizens, your jurisdiction. You handle them accordingly. France, Germany, and we just go down the list. Saudi Arabia, etc. Now you can't say that I created international incidents. I took care of my people. Oh, by the way, the people that were giving you are on a no entry list from this point on to this country. They're never welcome back here again. You either deal with them or figure out what else you're going to do because they will never set foot on American soil again.
Should we make that list public of the no entry list? Or
I
is it public?
I would like to. That is a very legitimate question that I, at this stage, couldn't answer because if we took your suggestion, hell, we might as well just go ahead and keep the whole list and just go ahead and try to have jurisdiction over even if they're not our citizens. Extradite them and try to bring them back. So that may not work too well, John.
No,
But that's one of the things that's one of the issues that you see we're struggling with at the moment.
I accept there's diplomatic immunity. I don't like the process. I don't necessarily totally agree with it. How many drunk members of the diplomatic community of other nations have done drunk driving and killed people? Plenty. How many of them have done worse than that? Plenty.
Plenty.
But I do understand that it maybe needs to exist for governments to not go to war over things. I can maybe get that. But that, in my opinion, okay, bottom line is Mr. Jimmy Jones from I guess it'd be. I think Jones comes from Wells. I want to say it's Welsh, but from England, or Mister whatever it may be from France. Sorry,
Hmm.
your name is now in the. I think it should be made public. We'll let you handle who you're going to handle with, but we're making these names public because, hey, bottom line is we can't try them, but we want to make sure that the rest of the world knows, hey, Prince Prince Jimmy Joe or Prince
Right.
Babu, hey,
You see,
the world needs to know.
they do, and part of the problem is we're dealing with this issue. And we can, we can move on, but is because these people have such influence, control wealth, etc. You've had administrations with no backbone. Well, I don't want to borrow from the country. We might need them for something else. Now let's just keep them on a list that we've got them for something. We can blackmail them. We can get what we want. Well, that probably is true. That probably works, but it's still morally corrupt to do that. That is, it is never right to do wrong to do right. Okay, and quite frankly, for our government to have over the years even supported such an ideology, well, let's just keep quiet about it and hold it over their heads and make them do what we want to do. That's wrong. They need to be prosecuted. If we can't prosecute them, you send the list over to their governments. Say these people here have better never set foot on our soil again. Because here's why. Here's what they did. You have the authority to prosecute. They're your citizens, not ours. But be it advised, you let they set foot anywhere near this country again, we will then exercise the ability to keep them, and we will hold them accountable. This is your one-time pass.
Okay, so we've got let's continue on with the Pam Botany, Cash Patel. So what should we do? Do you see the Epstein list and the P Diddy list and so forth wind up and all the individuals that have taken children, taken delivery of the
Mhm.
380 missing children, 380,000 missing children that were brought over from foreign countries? What's happening there?
The number is actually 730,000, and
Whoa.
we have recovered almost a half a million so far.
What are we doing with the perpetrators?
Right now, we have again same issue. We have the list, and what I want to do with the perpetrators, I can't repeat on the air. But quite frankly, here is the situation that we have. Now let's tie this in to what's going on with Pam and Cash. Um, and you asked a question, very valid question. Do we ever think it's going to actually be exposed or not? Here's what you have. You have what we talked about earlier: influential people fighting, etc., using legal means, legal positioning. You have threats being made against cabinet members and others if things get out. But quite frankly, I think that this is the point I'm making. I don't think I'm the most popular member up there in DC at the moment, but my point is very pointed and clear. You should have never made the promise if you weren't going to deliver. We have told the American people that these lists would be given, people would be held accountable. The American people have been exceptionally patient in waiting for that, but patience always runs out. If it gets to the point where the American people perceive that we have not been truthful and honest, even if it's not because we don't want to be, but because we're hitting too many walls and can't seem to break through those walls, you will lose the trust of the American people. And when you lose their trust, guess what's going to happen in 2026? You won't be able to get anything done after that election. Guess what's going to happen in 2028? Who cares whether you vote or what you vote for? They're all the same. You will have lost a golden opportunity. So my point is that look, if we're hitting walls and getting bounced back, we just gonna need to get a bigger tank, okay? A bigger fella. I don't care what you want to call it, but we're gonna get through that wall, one way or the other. We're gonna get through that wall. We're gonna take it down. You have no choice now. You have put yourself in a position that if you don't, and it's not just that you won't get anything done. What will your legacy be, Mr. President? The American people rose in swelling numbers behind you because they saw hope. Do you want to be the one to tell them? Sorry, you gave me hope, but even I couldn't do anything with it. Um, if we have to tell them that, we're going to have to tell them that. But I'd rather them figure that out on their own over my dead body, because I was trying to put a bust through that last wall instead of just saying, "Hey, the wall's too thick, we can't make it through."
Right.
We need to find a way to get through that wall.
When do you think I can't remember. I do not believe the MLK files have been released, or were they just recently
They were.
released? Okay,
They were.
what have we found out from those files? And do you think we're seeing all of the RFK Jr. files as well?
Let's be clear on all three files: the JFK, MLK, and RFK. Yes, vast majorities have been released. Enough has been released that if you've seen it and studied it, not just the paperwork, the videos, etc., it's very easy to see what happened. Our government was involved behind all of these, okay? Our agencies were rogue. They were being discovered, and they were determined not to let anybody destroy their plan and action to control this country and to control its elected officials. That is what the bottom line is. Is all the information out? I'm convinced it is not. But am I sitting here begging? I need another 5 pages. I got enough information. I know exactly what's going on, and I can show everybody how to read it to make sure that they can have draw the same conclusion. Now I want to know what we're going to do about it. Who we're going to hold accountable? Once again, indictments, convictions, trials, accountability. We have said as a key plank of this administration that people will be held accountable. Well, you don't need to be talking about it anymore. You need to be doing it. So what are we going to do to hold these people accountable? And who's left to be held accountable? Those three things. Who's left to be held accountable? How are we going to hold them accountable? And then thirdly, how are we going to make sure that the agencies itself can never, ever be involved with such nefarious activities again? Do they need to be dismantled? Do they need to be restructured? Do they need to be eliminated? That needs to be debated.
What would you say needs to be done?
At a minimum, restructuring. I think, quite frankly, a lot of elimination. There's an old adage, Ronald Reagan used to say it all the time. Every time government grows, freedoms go away. I think our government is so bloated and so big now that I think you got a big fat boy out there that, quite frankly, could lose a couple 100 pounds.
Which organizations would you like to see go away?
Well, let's talk about not just what I want to see. Let's talk about what's best for the country. First of all, the CIA.
Well, Michael, the ones that you think, in my opinion, the ones that you think are the ones that are to remove are the best ones for the country. That would be my estimate. Let me be clear on that.
Yeah, I might concede that point. Well, let's talk about them then. The CIA. Nothing really can be accomplished in a very positive manner. I'm talking about militarily. I'm talking about strategically without intelligence. Intelligence agency is critical. Our national intelligence agencies are critical, okay, in this country. However, you have to have agencies that are accountable to the American people and are not running rogue and are not putting in surveillance programs and other things onto the guys that we're just trying to help keep track of terrorists. But that's a bunch of bull. They're trying to keep track of the American people. And it's not just the American people, that's a broad term. They're trying to keep track of people like you and I that don't necessarily agree with everything they're doing. They want to make sure that they know who their friends and enemies are. That can't exist. So the CIA has to, no question, and its intelligence counterparts have to be restructured at a minimum. We have to really make the decision, can we not accomplish our intelligence needs in a different fashion without putting so many Americans at risk? Now let's talk about law enforcement. FBI, DEA, ATF. What are we really accomplishing? What was his purpose? His purpose was to deal with the mafia. The FBI was, okay? We had to have national jurisdiction because the mafia would go across state lines. So those are old problems. They're gone. What are they doing now? Well, that's a good question. I have people ask me that every day.
They're still going across state lines.
Yeah, but they're not going after mafia members anymore.
Right.
They're being weaponized and politicized to go after people that don't agree with a particular philosophy. Well, that's certainly not what we need. So we're going to have to restructure there. We're going to have people. And that you say, how do they demonstrate that? When you have agents that defy a direct order from the top, I don't care if you like it or not. Okay. If you don't like it, then just walk in, throw your badge on the desk and say, I'm out of here. That's the respectable thing to do. But to try to subvert what's being done because the will of the people voted to put that person in there, whether you like it or not, is just incomprehensible. And so we're going to have to do the same thing with those agencies. Some of those are not needed. ATF, what's our purpose behind ATF? We're going to make sure that nobody has, weapons that they shouldn't be possessing. Really? How many of those weapons do you think we confiscate a year? How big of a problem do you really think that is? What about DEA? Oh, we're dealing with the drugs. How many of you are dealing with it? Why is the drugs a national task force? Why is it not just being done on a state and local level? So there's some real questions as to what we need. Why do we have part of that here is Secret Service? Well, that's a whole other story I think we've got on your list. But you know what happened to Christie over the weekend? He had somebody that could get that close to the Homeland Security.
Okay. I know that there are some of my listeners that don't know. So let's talk about what happened with Christy No.
Christy went out for lunch on Easter with her family. She has a security detail. Here's what I want to say as we set the stage for this topic for this discussion. I've noticed this, and maybe some of your listeners notice the same thing. Those who are not taking a strong stand seem to be left alone. Media has nothing to say about them. Nobody's saying they need to be impeached or this or that. But when you have people taking a strong stance for the values and principles that are necessary to restore law, order, and justice to this country, President Trump and others, boy, they go after him. How many times did they try to assassinate the president? But Christie's been doing the same thing. If you followed Christie, she's a tough little gal, and she was down on the border with a M16 full tactical gear, driving the lead Buffalo vehicle into a raid on gang members down by the border. I mean, who's ever heard of a cabinet member doing that? There she was. She is just all over the place saying, we're going to get rid of these people, and she's doing it. She's not just saying we're going to get rid of them. She's standing there and watching them and helping them put the handcuffs on. So now suddenly she's being targeted. They want to make her look bad. So how do they try to accomplish this? She's out at lunch with her family. Gentleman sits in the table next to her. Now, here's the first question. How do you get that close to somebody? Where's your Secret Service detail? Because you have one. You have a very large Secret Service detail. So where were they? But he's able to sit there, move his chair closer to her. She doesn't notice. Stick his left foot out, tap her purse. And actually, his leg even hits her leg at one point. You can see on the video. Slide the purse over, then put his jacket over and get up and walk out. You say, what's significant about that? First of all, how did anybody get that close? Second of all, who did the schedule? Thirdly, here's what she had in the purse. They're making a big deal about the $3,000 in cash. I don't think money means that much. But all of her pass cards, everything, dealing with Homeland Security was all in that purse. We had to go ahead now, there's no use to them now, gone in and changed everything. But quite frankly, it looks to me the same way that we've seen other incidents happen with the president and other things. What is going on with the security details? If because you suddenly don't like the viewpoint of the person that you're assigned to protect, they're no longer getting this protection that they really deserve or need. These are some serious allegations. These are some serious issues that have to be discussed. So we get back to what you were talking about restructuring. Secret Service is in there. We still, John, are sitting here tonight. And I don't even know what the day is, or sometimes we're towards the end of April.
22nd of April.
Have you gotten a final report? Because I haven't. Maybe you got connections I don't, of the details of what actually happened on the 2 assassination attempts of the president?
No. In fact, what about the incident that happened in, I want to say it was it Arizona, where a
Correct.
bunch of people on stage had issues with their eyes. They weren't
Correct.
sure if it was chemical or some type of laser beam. So,
So you see the problem. This is not how security details. This is now how law enforcement is to operate, but it is. So back on what we were talking about restructuring, that was another agency. So you begin to see now. Let's talk about the Department of Justice. You know, you can make arrests, but you can't solve the problem. You can't put people in jail without somebody trying them. That's what the Department of Justice is charged with doing. They are the lawyers for the United States, the U.S. attorneys, etc., who are to prosecute all these crimes and get these people off the streets and behind bars. Well,
right.
what did they prosecute in the past? You remember that's why we voted for a different administration. They were prosecuting grandmas for what happened to be walking up to the U.S. Capitol on a day when they said they weren't supposed to be there. Nobody even knew they weren't supposed to be there.
Or
So we
praying
could
on
go
the sidewalk of
praying on
an
the
abortion
street.
center.
Exactly. And I mean, we could, like I said, we don't have enough time on your show. We could go on and on and on. So we put in somebody else. We've got a new president, a new administration, a new attorney general who's promised we're going to make those changes. And we're going to go after and start cleaning this stuff up. You know what? Again, I'm asking the question. I see other agencies making it a lot faster cleanups than I've seen in some of these. EPA, boy, they're going to town over there. They found $2 billion or 20 billion, excuse me, in gold that the previous administration had stashed away in private banks to allow them to continue to fund programs that this administration didn't support. I mean, he's just going to town. We're going to, stop all these programs, these climate, uh, energy programs that are, climate for climate safe. I've lost the word for that, but you know what I'm
Climate
talking about.
change.
Yeah, climate change. That's the word, change. We're going to stop all these things because they don't work. They're bogus.
They
We all
got rid
know
of
it.
global warming because the planet was starting to cool. So now they just call it global climate change. Wait,
Climate
I mean,
change.
the
Exactly.
climate's always changing, right?
Exactly. But do a shout out for EPA. They're getting some things done. Let's talk about DOD. I realize, man, what a mess we have over there. But here's the point. You've been there for 3 months almost. You need to understand, everybody needs to understand when you go into this administration that the people that are your staff and support don't like you. They like the old fashioned way because they're covering for each other. Nobody wants the nefarious things to ever come out and make them look bad. So you better understand that when you walk in the door, you better start cleaning house real quick. You might need to stay 10 or 12 hours a day to begin with and start, taking a baseball bat and busting up some areas and just cleaning it out. The fact of the matter that we haven't cleaned out and we still have all these leaks going on at DOD, I sympathize that they're targeting wanting you out. But either you got to take a strong hand, tell me you need additional help because you can't get all done, or you need to be realize that this is you're in over your head and step aside and let somebody else come in that can do it. Because quite frankly, the future of our country depends on it.
Well, there was another thing that wasn't on our list that I wanted to talk to you about that I did not add. Frisco, Texas. The incident between Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf and his brother. Okay, so and then we've got a now I don't know community organizer who happens to be
A crook.
not just a crook, a criminal.
Correct.
I mean, if I remember, I can't remember if he was. There were 2 times that he was recently in prison, and I want to say one of them was because he assaulted someone
I
himself.
was going to say assault.
And I
Assault.
want to say
That
it
is
was on a
correct.
female, and I want to say it was like, but I can't remember exactly, so I'm not going to say. But he has a criminal record, and the bottom line is he does a news conference. So one of the things that Austin Metcalf's dad, a white young man was stabbed in the heart by another individual. I believe it probably wasn't it wasn't racism. It wasn't racial from the standpoint that it was racially motivated. But the bottom line is it's culture related, and that's one thing that I think we got to fix, and we've got to
I
work
would
on.
agree. I would agree to a point. I'm gonna probably give you a little disagreement with you on this one, John. I do think that culture is racist. I think you have as much or more racism on blacks versus against whites as you do the other way around.
I would
And I
concur.
think quite frankly that had an active role in this. But here's what is insulting to the American people: your son stabbed and killed somebody, and I'm going to take the position that it was the school's fault because they should have canceled the game because it was going to rain. It would have never happened if there hadn't been a game. Anybody's fault but my son's. My son's a victim, and he needs all the money you can send to help him beat this charge. And here's where I'm insulted. The son's already said it's not like who did it. He already said, "Here's my knife. Here's what I do. Here's what I used. Yep, I did it." And now we're going to try to say there's no consequences to actions. John, where have we gotten to in this country?
And he was given bail like for 250 $250,000. It was
That's
dropped down to
correct.
$250,000. Now, okay, so here's my question. I've had this little bit of a argument with some people I know. When Bell is declared to be $250,000, how much money does the family actually have to come up with? Do they actually have
10%.
to? Huh?
10%.
10%.
You see, it was just you said it a million, which means he would have had to come up with 100,000. Not necessarily cash. You have a house that's paid for and that's worth, a couple 100,000 or 100,000. You can use that as collateral. There are various things you can do. You don't have to give them cash, but you are required to do 10% of whatever the bail that is set, the bond, excuse me, not the bail, the bond. And so the initial bond was a million. They went back. How could you do that? This is a poor minority family. You know good and well that that's just sentencing him to have to stay in jail until the trial because nobody could come up with $100,000. Judge reconsidered, dropped it down to 250,000, which is 10%, 25,000, and they were able to make their plea to the Democrats, especially. This is a bleeding heart, poor, wayward youth that we have let down. We as a country have let down, and we need to take responsibility and help make his path straight and help make it cushy again. And America, there's a lot of liberals still in this country. They poured in resources, and they were able to meet that bond. Not just a $25,000 bond, but he's got quite a war chest now for legal expenses.
Around $400,000.
Correct.
In fact, it's closing in on $500,000 the last time I checked. So what I look at, I listen to Jason Whitlock from time to time. You know, his stuff comes up on my Twitter feed, and I love Jason Whitlock on his take on this. Bottom line, it's a culture thing, and this because he felt like he was disrespected. He feels
Yes.
justified in stabbing another individual with a knife. I'm like, we've got to figure this out as a culture, and it's not entirely just in the black culture. It's everywhere. And I'm sorry, I have no problem with the young man saying, "Hey, this is our team's tent. You need to go somewhere else." And
Right.
I bet you if he would have handled it just a little bit better himself, like, "Hey, man, our team, I'm getting soaking wet. There's no place left. There's no room. Can I please stay under the tent?" Had he handled himself as a normal human being, as you would, you know, as two decent people, there's a good chance that he would have stayed. But the other thing is, uh, Austin Metcalf's father is a really upstanding guy. He said, "You know what was this? What kind of parents? What kind of parents raised this kid?" But then he winds up saying, as a Christian, I forgive him. I'm like, it's pretty impressive.
It's very impressive. Quite frankly, that gets, I mean, we were talking about children. I know we've got this on our list, but the FSU active shooter,
Yeah, let's
he's a
talk about that
20-year-old
too.
son of a female deputy. Now, let's do a couple quick points. Most people are familiar with the story, but a couple quick things we need to say. First and foremost, our hearts go out to the victims, including the family of the assailant. And the reason why is because he grew up in a law enforcement family. His mother served on the force for 18 years. So he was part of a law enforcement community. So the law enforcement community mourns his loss as well. But here's what we need to be very clear about is regardless of the circumstance behind it, if you don't hold people accountable, you have no accountability at all. We have been playing with this for too many years in this country. Selective accountability. You get to get off, John, because you have a name recognition, or you got money, or you got this or that, or your political party. The person next to you, nah, throw him under the jail. We cannot tolerate that. So the same accountability has to be done regardless of your background. But as we talk about this for just a moment, one of the things that I mentioned on the show earlier today is that two things stick out of my mind about FSU. First of all, we commend the campus police for doing exactly what they were supposed to do. They knew their training, they did it effectively, they immediately engaged the assailant, and they saved countless lives. Second thing is they went in there doing that even though they didn't have active shooter vests. So they were willing to put their lives on the line even though they weren't properly protected. So it's a reminder. We need to make sure that we as a country can do better. Our first responders deserve the ability to protect themselves and go home to their kids just like you and I do. Then the third thing is something we don't talk about very often, and that is the mental capacity or the mental state of our first responders. Am I picking on them? No, I'm one of them. But let me tell you this, you see the worst of the worst every day. It has a dramatic effect. We have the lowest morale in history. We have the highest suicide rate in history in our among law enforcement. We have the highest divorce rate. And why do I use the divorce? Why am I throwing that in there? Because the stress of PTSD not only affects the officer, it affects the family. And quite frankly, it's time that we take this matter seriously and we start providing the kind of resources necessary to help heal the wounds mentally from many of our officers who've had experienced so much over the years. Because it also affects the family. And then quite frankly, I can see that as part of what happened at FSU.
So, okay, so here's a question I want to ask you. They were I've heard this, and I don't know this to be true. I have not seen it other than heard it on a couple social media sites on Twitter that active there was an active shooter drill being done at the same
Correct.
time this happened.
Yeah,
Does
one
that
was
raise
commencing,
any
yes.
question marks for you?
Typically it would, but in this case, it seems to be more coincidental, although you can't rule out that especially with the child having such strong connection with the law enforcement community, didn't somehow know that that was going to occur at that time. Of course, the flip side of that, the argument against that is why would you try to make such a movement or such an attack when you know that they're poised and ready to bring it down? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense either.
So let's give a couple of the just quick rundown because I know there's a few people in my audience who don't know all about the FSU shooting. So let's talk about it was done by was it a deputy, a reserve deputy?
No,
Child.
the
Okay.
the mother is a full force deputy, has served for 18 years, has very meticulous record, by the way. Now the child is an adopted child. The child came with problems. Okay, it is well known that the child has some very strong racial um, frustrations. Okay, and that was expressed. I'm sure it had to have been expressed throughout the house. Did the family do enough to get him support for his anger management, we could argue that, debate that all day long. But now he took the service weapon. And I will be careful how I use this word. It was the prior service weapon. All the time, agencies will change the manufacturer or the caliber or the usage of service weapons. And then they'll offer that to the members. You can buy your old service weapon for self protection or whatever, or just turn it back in. She chose to buy it to keep you have something available at the home for anybody that may need it if she wasn't there. The question becomes, did she have that properly secured? I think you'll see some debate on that down the road.
In
Every
my
law
opinion,
enforcement officer.
properly secured means it's in somebody's home. I
There will be those that will differ. I'm not saying I'm one of them. There will be those that will differ with you that say it should have been in a lock with, a safe with only like a fingerprint access, et cetera, et cetera. The
and
problem with
then
that, John, that's a whole different matter. But if you bust into my house and I got to try to remember how to get the gun out, by the time I get it, I'm dead.
right,
So I understand
absolutely.
both sides of the issue.
No, sorry. It's the individual that pulls the trigger of the firearm. That's who the responsibility. Okay, so there's a secondary factor on this. The left seems to be saying, well, shouldn't this uh, deputy be held accountable for the child's actions? And how old was the child? How old
20
was the youth? Was he attending FSU as well?
part time.
Do we know why his reasoning for going to FSU was, and
Still under investigation.
what happened to the shooter?
Oh, he's deceased. No. I take that wrong. Nope. He was shot and injured, but he is still alive.
Okay, so there are people that are saying that this parent should be held responsible, just like up in
Well,
Michigan. And I
interesting. Yeah, I was on a show today and they brought up what you just said. He not be held accountable just like the ones in Michigan? Of course, in Michigan, it's a little different. They purchased and gave a firearm to somebody they knew was mentally unstable. This was not the case here, but you're seeing that come up, John.
well, I'm going to say, in my opinion, the bottom line is in Michigan, the parents really shouldn't have been held accountable. I mean, it's just part of life.
Yeah.
It's just part of
I,
life.
in my opinion, and I'm gonna probably agree with you from this standpoint. They probably did some stupid things. I wouldn't have went out and bought my son an AR-15 if I knew he was having some mental struggles. But is that criminal? They should be locked up for it. When we start down that slippery slope, John, we're already headed down that slippery slope. And let me tell you how that translates into something else. It's not even on your list for us to discuss. But now the transgender and the gay and lesbian community, and through our school districts, are now getting legislatures to pass that if you, as a
Right?
parent, do
Don't
not
affirm. Right?
affirm whatever they think they should be, then you can be criminally liable and criminally charged. How
And your children
satanic
can be
can you
removed
be?
and taken away.
Correct. I mean, how satanic can you be to even come up with that kind of a thought? It's mind boggling to me. But same principle, that hey, your kid does something, we're going to hold you responsible. I get it when your kid's 5 and he runs over and knocks a vase off of a shelf in a grocery store. Yeah, I end up paying for it. You know what I mean? That's just part of being a parent. But this stuff when they're 18, 20, 15, 16, whatever it is, they have their own will, their own mind, and you've done your best to help mold that, but sometimes it doesn't always take, John. And to say that you should be held responsible because it didn't take, I think is atrocious.
I would concur. What is your unless you're actively winding up the individual to send them out?
Correct.
Now, kind of like what might have happened with with the shooter that took some shots at Trump in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Now you wind someone up to go to commit an heinous act. Well, then okay, you should be held accountable. But that's a totally different.
But talking about that the little 2 seconds I lost within there, what happened in Washington State with the teen that murdered his parents so he could collect the life insurance so he could help fund a plot to assassinate the president. Where are we at with our young people nowadays, John?
Well, if I understand correctly, he was also part of a satanic
That is
type
correct.
group,
That is
and
correct.
they were winding him up to do that.
Correct.
Those individuals, that's a scenario where maybe it should play out that they should be held accountable for some actions there too. Governor Shapiro, what happened there on Passover?
I think he's quickly finding out how kooky and crazy the left has gotten because of the fact that they didn't feel like he was doing enough in promoting the leftist agenda. Somebody came in and burned his house while they were in it. Now, yeah, they got him out, no problem, and moved him to a secure location. But it's getting to what we've been talking about on this show all along, John, is, you know, we don't have the ability to have discourse anymore. It is, my way or I'm going to kill you if you don't. That's a sad state for this country to be in. I will tell you this: conservatives have never been that way. Conservatives have always said, and you say, why would you make that statement? Look at our administrations over the last 50 years. Most have been liberal. We've had Ronald Reagan, we've had Donald Trump. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give George Bush that same credit, but just those two have been conservative. All the others have been ultimately liberal. So we've had a lot more liberalism than we've ever had anything else in this country. And who are the ones that are incinerating, throwing cocktails on cars, Molotov cocktails, burning down cities, etc.? It's not the conservative cause or the right cause. I'll tell you that. It's always been the left.
Um, so they found the individual. Now, what I think is crazy is he was able to throw, I believe it's basically a Molotov cocktail at the house, right?
He got it through the front window.
And he was able to get away, jumped
Correct.
over the fencing. Now, eventually he was caught, but wow.
Again, it kind of gets to this whole issue. Now, I realize this is a different matter. This is a state matter, and I would imagine their state law enforcement were in charge of the protective detail. But, uh, it kind of points to a broader concern, John. I hear people tell me this all the time as we're across the country. People don't have a work ethic anymore, do they? People don't take jobs seriously anymore. Give me my paycheck, tell me what's the least I have to do for the job. And even the security details, we're seeing that happen now.
Okay. I am a little concerned to kind of go back to the conversation that had to do with Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf, FSU, and Josh Shapiro. I'm really worried that there is, in fact, I made a prediction on my show last week with David Pine. I said, I'm a little concerned about Cinco de Mayo, where there's been a lot of talk about the white, the Proud Boys, and I forget the other like military type group that I think is actually a bunch of FBI guys that dress
Right.
up in the khakis. Oh, what's the name of that group? Ah,
I can
slips my
see them in my mind, but I can't remember their name.
but they have they have the same hat, the same
Yep.
mask. They
They
have their
have a
mask.
uniform. Yep.
I mean, it looked like they look like they're a bunch of feds or military guys.
Correct.
So when there's been a lot of talk in the left that the conservatives are going to come out and start attacking, all the way back to Biden saying the number one threat in America is conservative white men. I think that's going to be ginned up here soon, and I'm worrying about them doing something stupid finding some guy that's been wound up and having them go after a bunch of not just illegal aliens, but we've got Cinco de Mayo coming out.
Right.
Not only the illegal aliens would be at these celebrations, but so would American Hispanic people. Are you hearing any chatter about that? Because that's something that has me really concerned that we're going to
There's
see
a lot
that
of
this
chatter.
summer.
You're seeing a lot of chatter going on about this becoming the second summer of love. You remember
Right,
what does that mean for most people that don't understand what we're talking about? When we had the George Floyd riots and cities were burned, etc., they dubbed that as the summer of love for
right.
the violence. And so now they're trying to say there's going to be a second summer of love because of the leftist violence this time around. I tend to, based on the intelligence that I've seen, John, I'm not saying that there are not some um, validated or viable threats, but I think there is more rhetoric than there are actual validity, because I think what they're attempting to do is throw everything but the kitchen sink to try to stop progress of this administration. And so if they can get people to be scared of hey, too much is happening in this administration. We're making too many changes. We need to slow down. We need to stop. That's their goal. And if they can convince
Right.
Americans that every time that we announce something, there's going to be riots and etc., they're hoping to turn the American people against what they voted for initially back in November.
There's basically four other subjects that I want to hit quickly. China and Russia flying over Alaska. You told me about that. You brought that to
This
my
happened
attention.
about 3-4 hours ago. We had uh, two Chinese bombers, two Russian bombers. Never seen that before. In a formation pattern, we scrambled F-35s, intercepted, and buzzed them off. But it wasn't like they were, oops, we were on the line and we accidentally stepped over by a half of an inch. No, this is a direct intrusion into American airspace. It was almost as if it was a provocative threat. And of course, we know that there's a number of reasons behind that. China, what the listeners don't understand, we'll try to make it very brief but very clear, is China has been spending its money trying to destroy America. But unfortunately, by doing so, their economy is hanging on by a thread. When the president decided to impose tariffs, and he did it for a number of reasons, a lot of it the mainstream media have not been reporting. So there's a lot of misinformation. But one of the reasons was not just to right the trade balances, but what was to send a clear message that America is sovereign and America can take care of its own without the assistance or the dependency on any other country. When we did that with China, their economy now is really taking a dive, almost like a plane getting shot out of the air. You see it just spiraling down, fixing to explode. And so they're desperate, extremely desperate. And their position is if they can provoke an armed conflict, no, they're not going to come land on California beach or or South Carolina beach. But if they can provoke an armed conflict, like say in Thailand, or Taiwan, excuse me, some other place, and create some diversion to the economic tactics and try to get Americans all fired up that all this has happened because of your president's poor economic policies, that again, hopefully they can derail what they're looking for, to derail the administration's agenda and to bring it down to its knees.
Okay, so what has me concerned, especially though, is Russia and China together, and Russia doing this when Donald Trump is trying to work out a peace deal in Ukraine, and Russia teams up with China and does this.
I would tell you
I'm
this.
assuming Putin knew this was happening,
I
and
think that's a
Putin
correct assumption.
signed off on it. So
I
that
think that's a
has
correct
me
assumption.
very concerned. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, I happen to have very close contacts over there as well. And I can tell you this, There's been some posturing. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Our president has postured that, hey, look, I am the big boy on the block. I'm going to tell you how we're going to have peace. And of course, on the flip side, the president of Russia has kind of implied, if you look at his actions and his attitudes and his mannerisms, that's fine for you to say, but I am the president of my people, and I'm not going to let them have the impression that I am pushed around or that I will bow to pressure. And so he sends subtle hints back. Don't push too hard because there could be consequences uncalculated. And obviously, he just sent a message on this one today. Uh, you know, we're not bed buddies with China, but hey, you want to push me too hard and cause me to feel like you're embarrassing me in front of my people, I can always find another ally. We don't want that.
Yeah, we want to play these two off one another as opposed
Correct. Correct.
to bringing them
But
closer.
the president had some great strategies to do that. Even in um, um, Ukraine, the president's position was: look, Russia has taken some property. They need to give some back. But in the peace accord, they can probably retain some of the ownership of some of the mining, mineral-rich areas. Ukraine will still have plenty of it. We will enter an agreement to where we will buy minerals from both countries. And by doing so, by buying them, that means that we will have an American presence there, not a military, but an American presence. We'll have our engineers over there, our people helping, to mine the materials, etc. Everybody in this world knows that their American presence, especially their civilian, and you harm an American civilian who is working for the U.S. government, that was probably the wrong thing to do. And so it would have provided what Zelensky was demanding. He just didn't know. He's got very poor diplomacy skills. He would have had U.S. protection. It just would have been subtle protection. Because, quite frankly, Americans, as this American, I'm speaking for myself as well, do not support sending troops or boots or money to that country. They're their own sovereign nation. And I'm tired of being the world's police, putting our men and women in caskets to enforce something that we get nothing but taken from when we do that. So this would have been a way of getting it accomplished. It would have been best for all parties. And quite frankly, I still think that's what's going to ultimately happen. So Russia needs to be a little careful. I understand you want to flex your muscle a little bit back to show your people that, yeah, I'm still just as much as a big boy as he is. But let's put the theatrics aside and let's just get this thing signed on some very strong proposals that the president has put forth and move forward with peace.
What are your thoughts on Iran? What's happening in Iran
Iran's a different matter.
and Israel, and Donald Trump saying to well, let me put it this way. Do you think Donald Trump is the biggest fan of the Israeli prime minister?
No.
Of
Quite
Netanyahu?
frankly, no. I think the president learned, we've had some conversations along this line in the first term, that, and I believe this scripturally. I believe that we should bless. Scripture is very clear. God blesses the nations that bless Israel. Okay. But there's a difference between blessing and being taken advantage of. Israel has a strong economy. It has strong finances. It doesn't need our billions of dollars in foreign aid. That's an insult to the American people. It doesn't need our armaments. You want to know the honest truth about it? Sometimes their armaments are better, are more tech than ours are.
Right.
So, quite frankly, I think, yes, we're partners, we're good friends, we should stay that way, but don't take advantage of me. And that's what Israel's doing. And we need to be careful there. I think that's what the president is looking at now. Yes, we are on our commitment. You're always going to be our friend. But, friends don't take advantage of each other. Quite frankly, we've been being taken advantage of for a long time. And it's time that we just kind of say, okay, we are happy to do that when we helped give you birth in 48 and help watch you grow through your infancy. But you're a big man now. You're capable of doing your own. And America needs to be taking care of America first.
I would concur. So, what are your thoughts on Iran?
But Iran is a different story. Iran is determined to, even though, here's what's interesting, they're even more determined now because their people are beginning to revolt against the Ayatollahs and the Sharia law, etc. It's kind of funny. They're revolting there, and yet we're trying to impose it here in America.
We're
Aren't
trying
we
to we're
crazy?
trying to bring them here.
Yeah, that's what I said. Aren't we crazy? But anyway, because they are still in power, the Ayatollahs, they know that they can have greater control of staying in power if they have nuclear capability. And so they're not going to give that up. And they know that they have a treaty with Russia that if they go into an aggression against allied powers, that Russia will stand with them. Now, I don't believe, quite frankly, that Putin is crazy enough to not circumvent that. And I'll tell you how in just a second. But we cannot allow them to have nuclear capabilities, Israel especially. But it's not just Israel anymore. They now have rocket launch capacity in Iran to actually probably hit New York City or other places. So we're determined not to let that happen. One of the things that the previous administration did to make it happen, of course, they gave them all that money, $6 billion in cash here, 60 billion there. We've cut off their funding because their economy can't sustain themselves on its own. We're hoping that works enough to collapse it. But if it doesn't, and quite frankly, my fear is that it won't, then somebody's going to have to take out that nuclear capacity. I would think the Russian government would understand that's not worth them going to war over. Because quite frankly, at the end of the day, Russia understands it's not in their best interest either for Iran to have nuclear capability. And who is the most likely to spearhead that raid would be Israel. But I'm certainly they will do it with our blessing, and I'm certainly with our technical intelligence support as well.
Kind of the last one that is on my list is tariffs. What are your thoughts on what Donald Trump is doing with the tariffs?
Well, you have to understand the purpose. Initially people were thinking, and this could be an end result. Well, we'll shift from tariffs on personal income tax to tariffs. We'll be able to eliminate the taxes, and we can run this country on nothing but tariffs. I think, tariffs can help. I think that you're being a little bit over the top by perceiving that. However, one thing that tariffs can do is it gives us great leverage to make sure we restructure the trade markets. And in restructuring the trade markets, you restructure the positioning of the US dollar. For some time now, the US dollar has always been the currency of the world, the number one currency. And in the last administration, especially, it began to take a plunge, and to where now we're losing that status. And they were talking about in Europe making the euro the world currency, or the yen, or whatever it may be. But by involving tariffs, he brings the whole trade issue back into play to minimize it, to make a level playing field. Once we have a level playing field, the U.S. dollar will resume its dominancy globally, and we really need that to continue because that is tremendously beneficial to America, and it's tremendously beneficial to our country from jobs, manufacturing, from the selling of exporting of products. And I think the way he's doing it is such a practical manner. I mean, if you and I are going to sell products to each other, John, and I sell you my product, but you charge me another 50% on top of the selling price for me to take it over to your house to sell it, and I let you sell your stuff over at my house, but I don't charge anything. That's just not fair. It creates a negative image about this country that we've had for years. People don't respect weakness. I hate to tell you folks, but I think that's just a common fact. People don't respect weakness. And that makes us look weak, has been for generations. So the president's saying, okay, I'm bringing tariffs, and here's what it's going to be very simple. You charge 50%, we charge 50%. Well, I'm going to drop it to 40. Then we'll drop it to 40. I'm going to drop it to zero. Then we'll drop it to zero. Whatever it is, you get to make the call. You get to be in charge. You tell us how much you're going to charge us, and just bear in mind we're going to charge you the same thing. Well, all these countries realize that if they don't do something quickly, their economies will collapse. They depend on the exporting to America. And if we put tariffs now and they can't afford to do it anymore, their economies will collapse. Their people will revolt. They'll overthrow their corrupt governments, which most of them are anyway. And that's not where they want to be. So why do you think you've had 90 countries now scramble to get on the phone to the White House? Get me on the list sooner rather than later. Let's talk about what we can do to renegotiate a fair trade agreement between our nations. And we've already got, I think I was last briefed, I think there's, what were they telling me? 10, 15, maybe it was 12 that are actually in paper, on writing now, waiting the president's review and approval. And we'll eventually get around to making sure all 90 of them have it. And this country's going to be in so much better shape. But understand that the leftists are throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, to derail this administration and anything it does. One of the things they would love to do is cause the economy to tank. Because immediately when it happens, what were they going to do? I told you all not to vote for that crazy tyrant. But now look what he's done. Now, the economy's tanked and we're all standing in food lines trying to get a loaf of bread. That's what they would love to see. They don't care that it hurts you and I. They've never cared about Americans. They just want to have control. And they think that would cause people to turn on this administration. So they're trying to use this. Oh, look at what's going on with tariffs. Now you got them threatening to raise theirs even more. I'm telling you, this whole thing is going to lead to a depression. We're all going to be at a breadline by the end of the week. They're trying to invoke fear. Once again, we talked about that before. That they want to invoke fear. And that's what they're trying to do so that you will regret your decision to try to bring America back to values and principles, and you will be fearful. No, just whatever it takes. Just make sure that I can breathe and eat. That's all I care about. Folks, it's often been said one of the things that makes America so great is that our founding fathers are Christian founding fathers. And yes, they were Christian.
Christian.
Over 80% of those who signed the Declaration of Independence were either ministers or leaders in their church, deacons, bishops, whatever you want to call them. So, but the statement has always been made, when we first founded this country, Americans would rather die on their feet fighting than live on their knees before a tyrant. And that is what has made this country so great. We still have that same values and respect. And, don't let people cause you to be fearful to lose the vision of where we need to be.
Amen. Well, let's do this. I want to say thank you for joining me. Before you leave, tell us about investusa.org and how my viewers can help out investusa.org, please.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's interesting that Invest was created to support our first responders, to make sure they have the necessary vests to come home safe with their families. There's no reason why we should have the highest number of deaths we've ever experienced because they're ill-equipped and because the opponents, the cartelists, the terrorists, child sex traffickers, etc., are using long-range rifles, AK-47s now, to target and to go after our law enforcement officers. And so we created this charity 32 years ago. We've given away tens of thousands of vests. We have hundreds of thousands more left to do. But we did it for this one reason. Because instead of saying, well, that's not my problem, the government should be funding it. Tell that to a small child who asked me the question when I'm down on my knees, is my daddy ever coming home? No. Why is he not coming home? If I'm being honest with him, because he didn't have the vest that he needed. The government didn't give him what he needed to save his life. We're going to go out together, united. And I appreciate you being a part of this, John, the American people. And we're going to defend, we're going to protect our first responders because it takes a special person to put his life on the line for somebody he doesn't know, probably somebody who doesn't even like him, but yet he's willing to give up his life to make sure that they can remain safe and free. And that's what Invest has been doing. We've got so many projects going on. Bless the Vest, Pennies for Cops. We got a movie coming out. We've got 2 TV shows are on the way. We've got, of course, the book that I just did, Truth, Lies, and Control. We've got a graphic novel coming out of I call them comic books. I don't know why they call it graphic novel, but they say I'm dated. You know, comic
Well,
book
then I'm dated too. Then I'm dated too.
of
That's what I call them.
you know, and the graphic novel is 3 first responders, law enforcement officer, a firefighter, and an EMS, a paramedic, have served their community, but also have some special powers they can call upon when things get tough. And they tell me, I mean, I've seen it, and it's almost completed. They think it's going to be one of the best. Again, I'll use the word what I'm familiar with, comic books to have ever hit the market, kind of like a Superman or Batman. And I'm excited about that coming out. Those are just a few of the things. I could give you so much more that we're doing, but we're doing it all for one reason, folks. None of it means anything if we don't together unite and restore America to greatness through values and principles. So join us in doing that. Join us in supporting our first responders. Join us in standing for values and truths. You know, I want to kind of conclude with this, John. In the years back, people were ashamed to talk about truth or to correct anything that was crazy. I want you to know that now, under this administration, we're united to make sure we stand for the right thing. Somebody says something about, yeah, well, you know, they're not your kids or the government kids. No, they're not. They're our kids. They've never been the government kids. We will decide what they should be taught, not some crazy bureaucrat who has no idea what he's going to do to indoctrinate my kids. And we can go on and on and on. Now is the time. Get a backbone, America. Join us on the front lines. Let's finish this thing, and let's make sure that this nation survives for freedom and liberty for generations to come.
Well stated, sir. Thank you so much. Michael Letts of Invest USA, as always, thank you for joining me. And I look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks.
Look forward to it again, John. God bless. God bless America. One of these times on your show, I want to give a little bit of the history behind our national anthem, and you'll see why it means so much to be an American in this country.
Okay. I am making a note of that. History of national anthem. Done. We will
Look
talk
forward to it.
Take care, my friend. God
All
bless.
right, my friend.
All
God
right,
bless.
folks.
Take care.
This has been Talk with John with Michael Letts. We're so grateful you joined us. Look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. And take care. Have a great week. Goodbye.